Previously on the Seventh Valkyrie, BC is invited to partake in an elegant dinner at Eclipse by none other than the Machine King himself. Surrounded by hostages and the emotionless Mijlar, BC faces the shadow of her past against the silent backdrop of the star's eye. Next on the Seventh Valkyrie. And then he vanished as well, leaving BC, Krona, and the hostages. I hope you don't mind me spoiling the surprise, but we have a delightful meal ahead of us, and I took a quick look at the menu. To start, we have a trio of Reichsbase scallops, lightly glazed, seared, and topped with just the finest Freyla herb and wine cream sauce. They're named after Reichsburg Bay, where they're usually found, but the further north you go, the colder the water gets. I believe these were harvested from nearly uncharted waters up in the Icelands, so you'll be challenged to find a better bite of seafood anywhere on the planet. Oh, and of course, to match, we'll have a very dry white from the coast not far from here, though I couldn't pinpoint exactly where. The Mijlar are very protective of their house wines. The aroma filled the air and started BC's mouth watering. Even with her excellent salary, she could rarely afford to come to Eclipse. And the food ranged in flavor from trance-inducing euphoria to full-blown orgasmic. "I'm not eating, Krona," BC said. "Well, your loss," Krona said. "You are, of course, free to leave it to waste, but I will be exercising my freedom to..." He took a bite of the scallops, groaned in pleasure, and then continued speaking. "Speaking of freedom, what exactly did you do in your time of freedom, Blair? For all that woman did for you, for all that she sacrificed, for just the possibility of removing you from my employ. Tell me, what have you done over the past 2 or 3 years, Blair?" The aroma of the scallops was overpowering, and Krona groaned again as he sipped the wine. You really are missing out, Blair. It's fantastic, and compared to what I had earlier today, it just... Don't do this to me. I know your games. You can make anyone think whatever you want to them. You're a born liar and a better manipulator. Fuck you. Well, I disagree. I'm having quite a good time, and we haven't claimed a winner yet in this verbal spar, so I guess you could call this a game, but the lies are for others, Blair. I told you long ago that if you trusted me, I would let you in, and you agreed. That truth holds even now, especially the truth these scallops are to die for. He flicked his last scallop up on his fork, eating it slowly, savoring each bite and then sighing. Around them, the Mijlar began their effortless march, ferrying with them the second course, stopping only for a glance at BC before whisking away the previous one and its delightful aroma. Now this course is a 70-day aged, 6-day smoked fetterfowl. Now, fetterfowl are incredibly packed with flavor, but only down in the wetlands about 100 miles southeast of Mandus do they get anywhere close enough to being big enough to eat. They take those, harvest them, and then they sear it in a gold grain batter ever so lightly and serve with a fresh fermented summer berry jelly that's perfect. I just love the blend of the crunch, the fats, the tanginess, that absolutely perfect savory flavor. Now, some people prefer an azure blend for these, but I absolutely insisted on a classic ruby red for my wine. You do still love wine, don't you? Oh, I'm sure you do. Please, please, please have some. Or maybe don't. This might ruin other wines for you for good. What the fuck are you doing here? What? Krona, what are you doing? Can you sit and enjoy a cup of wine? I can explain it all in time, but we have a long evening, and I'm sure you're... BC stepped forward, and the light behind her flickered. "Why are you here?" Krona quirked an eyebrow and flicked a hand up to check on yet another hostage. Razor claws expanded and contracted from his fingertips, and BC stopped in her tracks. "Well, if you must know, I have business here that does not concern you. But I thought I might check on an old friend." "I'm not your fucking friend. You don't have friends." He sighed. "On that, you may be right. Did I mention that the girls here can't hear what we're saying? You can speak freely about us, our history, our torrid affairs. But anyway, if you must know, while my business has brought me here, I thought I'd check on you. I do miss you ever so dearly, Blair." "Liar," she said. "Oh, no, never. Especially not about that. I've thought about you quite frequently since you left me. But what do I find when I finally check in?" Suddenly she could see his jaw clench. "I see you squandering yourself here, living among people trapped in fantasies and just waiting to die." He took a drink of wine, and when he spoke, his voice had calmed from its brief outburst. "Oh, I understand. You always had a penchant for substance, and I may have helped that along. But at least when you worked with me, it complemented a life well lived, a life with damn purpose." "Shut up." "Actually, yeah, shut the fuck up. You do not know anything about my life here or what I have built." "Oh, and pray tell me exactly what it is you've been up to here, my dear?" "Wasting away every day on a blend of smoke, drink, and drug, watching the shows around you but never brave enough to dive in. Spending every single day finding some way just to make it to the next. Surely this is a worthwhile use of your talents, of your power, Blair." His voice dripped with It was either disdain, disgust, or disappointment, or all three. BC couldn't quite tell, but she could feel it. And it hit her. How do you know any of that?" she asked. "I have eyes everywhere, Blair." "No, you have them everywhere except here. You have eyes everywhere except here. We were always in the dark when we came to Reen. It was the one place you always wore armor. I bet you're wearing some now, even under those fancy fucking clothes." Krona was silent, cutting through the fetterfowl and taking a bite, but not responding. BC pressed. "You and I both know this was always the one place that you couldn't control. The four families are too powerful and too good at your game. They have too many eyes here, too strong control. You know that if you step at them, they're gonna fuck you up, right?" Krona took a deep drink of wine then, and sighed as he put the cup down. "You have a good hypothesis, Blair. With some elements of truth and some panache as well, but you were always a fiery one. I'll admit to some degree you're right. An open war against the families. Well, even I might be leaving that fight to chance. But do you really think that I'd have waltzed in here, alone, unguarded, without the approval of one of the families? A spider's web that's already built is just as useful as one that I've spun myself." BC fell silent. If the four families could be compromised by Krona, then Reen was already lost. BC refused to believe it. You're lying again," BC murmured. "The Erasmus Pact was made hundreds of years ago in a different time," Krona said. Oh, it'll hold as long as it needs to. But don't think that a single one of the 4 families isn't keeping eyes on the others, or making moves in secret. Turning her back, unsure of what else to do, BC returned to her table and sat down, finally giving in to the sense assaulting her on both sides. She was sure that she could see him smiling, even with his back turned, but she shoved him from her mind and dove into the bird until it was gone, and so too was the glass of wine. Like shades in the night, the Mijlar were there to refill her cup, and without another word, the dinner continued. Course after course after course, the Mijlar were there, with Krona delighted to explain and enjoy each one. There were rare steaks cut from the roaming cattle of the Golden Plains, sail serpent hunted from the barrier islands at the end storm's edge, curries packed with flavors and spices scavenged from the heart of the wastelands, where the Sandrins closely guarded their secrets. There were salads of fresh herbs from the heart of the southern jungles and the fruits of the western isles, topped with salts cultivated from the firelands, and all of it was painstakingly delivered, painstakingly prepared on their plates, with cup after cup after cup of brandies and whiskeys and velvet, rose, sapphire, emerald, golden, onyx, and diamond wines, all curated from the corners of the world. Each dish was more decadent than the last, and with each one, Krona's explanations grew more extravagant, until finally they both sat in silence, the festival of alcohol and cuisine seemingly at its end. For a little while, Krona said nothing, still stroking the necks of his hostages every time BC reached for her knives, or every time the candles flickered. But then, almost wistful, he spoke. I did forget to tell you. I made one special request for this evening. Think of it as a thanks from me. BC cocked her head to the side as the Mijlar delivered their final plates, then gripped the table so hard she nearly flipped it. Fresh, gold-grain pound cake, topped with hand-picked mossberry and a whipped glaze. The specialty of the southern districts of Mandus and its outlying regions. A familiar treat for you. The candle at BC's table flickered out. Soon afterward, so did his. Around them, even the faint din of the kitchen began to quiet, and the torches from table to table around them began to fade one by one. Eventually, all that remained was the glow of the ceiling above, and the light of the occasional flash of lightning. And now even those seemed distant and fading somehow. When you have connections in Mandus, Blair, home is never very far away. Krona was almost wistful, taking a spoonful of the cake and eating it. With a quirked eyebrow, he stood. You know, Blair, I could barely taste that, he said, one glinting eye shining in the darkness as he turned to face her. You must be working intensely hard to restrain yourself. In front of him, BC's hands shook, gripping the table, eyes only on that glinting eye slowly stepping closer, silhouetted even against the dying light, which was quickly fading from the walls and the night around them. The world is spinning faster, my dear, he said, voice like a hand stroking her hair. And soon it will spin itself apart like I have always told you. But in the end, I will rebuild a better one, and you will always, always be welcome to join me if only you ask. In front of him, BC's mouth opened and closed, but the only sound that came out was the intensifying shaking of wine glasses and silverware. One of the wine glasses began to rattle dangerously close to the edge. Before it could fall, with a sudden movement, Krona slid forward and caught it. He was close to her now, but just out of reach. His organic eye now met hers as well, man and machine king both staring at her. You know, he said, quietly, gently, maybe even supportively. You've changed since I last saw you. Perhaps you've grown up in the time we've been apart. I see so much more behind your eyes now. That storm that used to rage there, it still rages, but it's so much more fascinating. BC closed her eyes, still shaking the table, shaking her head, but his voice grew closer. But as it grew closer, for a moment it lost just that slightest edge of unshakable confidence. You're even more beautiful than the day you left me, he whispered. And with a whirring, clicking hand, he began to reach out. To touch her, maybe. But then he gritted his teeth and stepped back. With a swirl of his cloak, a turn of the heel, and a sigh, he was walking away. I supposed it would be too much to ask to finish my meal before company arrived, he said, mildly upset. Blair, as you go on in these next few days and weeks, remember what I said. Home is never far away, and you need only ask. And with that, he whistled out, and all at once the walls seemed to burst with light and sound, 1,000 fireworks going off at once and refusing to stop. The sudden blast of stimulation sent BC spasming and diving for the floor, cowering behind the table, fearing some attack. And only a second later, the black stone beneath her feet rippled and exploded upward, firing wildly into the space Krona had occupied. Curling into the fetal position, arm around her vitals, BC sheltered until the ringing of the fireworks gave way to shouting soldiers, overlaid with May's cry as they surged into the room, searching, calling out an alarm. But it would be no use. Krona would not have come if he was not sure that he could escape. As the calls quieted down, May returned to find BC laid back against the booth seats at the edge of the room. BC was teasing her star steel blades with gentle fingers and holding her jacket close around herself. From the pillar of stone that had erupted through the floor, there was a perfectly spherical gap, where it was like the stone had simply been erased from existence. If you traced the sphere, you would find equal portions taken from the floor, the remnants of a chair, and the very bottom of a wine glass, which now lay half drained on its side. Wreathed in green power, May knelt in front of BC and spoke quietly, softly. There was no response until she laid her hands on BC, whose eyes snapped up and met those of the old wild woman. May, he was here. I know, child, May answered. She looked at the gaps in the floor and reached out to gently lay a hand on BC's shoulder again. Are you in control? BC stopped. She rubbed the ground that had disappeared beneath her. Yeah, I'm in control. You can sleep in my suite if you'd like, May said. I'll keep you safe. But with every drop of alcohol-fueled arrogance and disdain for the world that BC could muster, she fought to her feet and stood. Thank you, May. I really appreciate that. But I just need to get some rest, I think. You've got a lot to do tomorrow, and I've got someone to fucking kill. With that, BC strode off into the darkness. And to May, the darkness seemed to reach out and swallow the girl whole. Want to know what happens next? Join us on Patreon to become a hero of Edera and get early access to episodes along with bonus features, director's commentary, and the full Tab to Archive. You can also find other ways to support us at the links in the description, and we will see you next week.